The third kind of victory that we discussed in the life of St. Anthony is victory against the ego, basically, the abolishment of pride. We see this extreme example of humility in the life of St. Anthony. He was truly like his Savior, a real humility that is worthy of mentioning here. He always desired to be the least. Take a look at the example that we just gave of him living on the outskirts of the city. He would sit at the feet of these men that he saw as his abbas. He would sit at their feet and learn from them and acquire from them these virtues. He would observe the way that they speak and the way that they behaved in order for him to be able to have an example of what it looked like to be a real Christian. He did not see this as something that was degrading to him. On the contrary, he saw it as an opportunity to grow. And he recognized that growth can only come if I place myself at the feet of those who can disciple me. He desired to be least. Even when he saw all of the snares that were set out by the devil, St. Athanasius writes about how it is that the Lord allowed for him to have a vision. And he opened the eyes of Anthony to be able to see all of the snares of the devil, all of the traps that were set up by the demons to be able to have humanity fall. And when he saw this, when the Lord allowed him to see this vision, it is said that St. Anthony was overwhelmed. And he asked how? How is it then that humanity can prevail? How can a human being succeed, have victory in light of all of these traps? And the Lord answered him and said, only through humility can you overcome. Only through humility. And so St. Anthony made it his personal goal to continue in this life of humility. And there's this beautiful example of how it is that when he was in the catacombs, he was even humble before the demons themselves. When he was in the catacombs, it is said by St. Athanasius in the life of Anthony that the demons would come and torment him. And they first began by trying to show him things in the wilderness like gold or silver, and through these false visions and apparitions. And he completely couldn't care less, and so he left these things behind. And they did not succeed in trying to win him over through the pursuit of treasure or comfort or whatever it may be. Then they reminded him of his sister. He said, how could you leave her behind? You have completely abandoned her. Is it not enough that she lost both of her parents? And they tried to remind him of his sister as a way to be able to persuade him to go back into the city. And again, he refused to listen to them in any way. They then would appear to him in the form of women, trying to appeal to physical lusts of the flesh. And again, through the grace of God, he was victorious. And then finally, when all of this was not successful, they came to him in the catacombs and they would physically abuse him. They would beat him up. And it is said that they had beaten him up so hard that eventually he actually lost consciousness. And one of the people who would come and bring him food to the catacombs and leave it at the door of the catacombs, when he realized that St. Anthony was no longer responding, he immediately knew that something had went wrong. When he entered into the catacomb where he would stay, he saw St. Anthony there, completely unconscious, and he carried him out of the catacombs and brought him back to the city. When St. Anthony came to and recognized that he was no longer in his dwelling place, in that little cave or hut that he had built for himself in the catacombs, he said, immediately, take me back. This is not where I ought to be. Bring me back to where I am supposed to be. When he brought him back to the catacombs, it is said that the demons came to him now in the form of these wild beasts, in the form of leopards and snakes and cobras and panthers and bears, and all of this to be able to instill in him what? Fear, great fear, because they had already beaten him up physically. So here he was already weakened from the beating, and now they're trying to instill fear in him. And his response is what? You don't need all of you to be here. I am weaker than the weakest of you. I am weaker than the weakest among you. He's even humble in front of the devils. He knows his weakness. He knows who he is, and he's not faking this. He sincerely believes it. He sincerely believes it. And in light of this humility, the devils flee. At some point towards um, further on in his life, as he is an elder now and he's in the deep desert, his disciples come to him and they tell him, the emperor Constantine has heard of you and he's written to you and he wants to meet you. So he says to them, what do I have to do with emperors? That is not that doesn't belong to any of my cares. I am only occupied with my Lord. But his disciples tell him, but this is the emperor. You got to reply to him. This could be a good thing for the church. This could be a good thing for you. And so in obedience to his own disciples, he says, if you think that's the case, I'll reply. So he replies to the letter of the emperor with a very humble response, wishing upon the emperor the Lord's blessings and the Lord's grace and protection. And he sends back his reply to the emperor. And his disciples seem to be very excited. Our Abba has received a letter from the emperor and he's responded back to him and they have had conversation and this and that. And they seem to be very impressed by this circumstance. And St. Anthony responds and says, Why? Why are you excited that emperors know of us? When in reality, the only thing that should excite you is that the King of Glory, the creator of the universe, knows each of our names, knows each one of us personally and intimately. Look at the humility of this man. He's not impressed by emperors and world leaders. On the contrary, the only thing that occupies his mind is how he is the child of God and a beloved of the Lord.